So, hey everybody, and welcome to another edition of In Conversation With. Well, my guest this week, she's a senior software engineer working at Microsoft. She's an Azure advocate. She's also a HashiCorp ambassador. On that note, my guest this week on In Conversation With is April Edwards.
Do you go by Johnny or John, by the way?
You can call me anything you like, April. How are you doing? You all right?
Fantastic. I'm doing well, John. Thank you so much for having me today.
Oh, not at all. I mean, thanks so much for agreeing to come on and saying hello to me. I mean, been doing this a few months now, so getting people like yourself on to have a chat about tech and, your personal life and development is fantastic. So thanks for joining me. So, I mean, to kick things off, April, I don't know, I'm surprised that there's nobody that doesn't know who you are that watches my my webcast. But if you don't mind giving us a bit of an introduction to yourself, that would be brilliant.
Sure. So for those of you who don't know me, my name's April Edwards, and as Johnny introduced me, I am a senior software engineer at Microsoft. I build with code with customers. What does that mean? I get brought into customer projects that are quite high profile, and I help them get their solutions into Azure. I work in an organization called CSE, which is Commercial Software Engineering. And my whole technical background started in the ops space. And then I've moved into the development space in the last several years. And I've kind of really worked in the DevOps space. I worked in app transformation, serverless technologies, cloud native platforms, kind of everything Azure. So that's kind of been the overarching of where my kind of technical journey's kind of come from recently.
No, absolutely. A bit of a mixed bag and gone through the ranks, so to speak, and got your way up to this rock star position that you now find yourself in with Microsoft. But I mean, it's great to see. I mean, the kind of things that you're putting out into the community and you're working with community people like myself is brilliant, April, to be honest. I mean, I've spoken with a lot of guests about their journey to get into the positions that they're in. I mean, I don't know. I have heard your journey before through Lisa's podcast and webinar. I was going to call it a webinar then. What am I in the 1980s now? on Lisa's YouTube. I mean, it's such a fantastic story. I mean, I don't know if you want to give us a little bit of a summary for your kind of road into tech and how it led up to this position that you're in now.
Yeah, I think I'm a firm believer that everything happens for a reason. And, we have these best laid plans. And I think all of us, have this idea of where we want to go in our career or where we want to start our career. For me, I was quite young. I was in high school in the US, and I went to a high school that had a focus program on computer arts and sciences. And I remember going in as a freshman into high school, and they're trying to place me into the courses. And my dad was like, yeah, she doesn't need to build computers. So they had this A+ certification course. My dad's like, yeah, that's not her. Like, he kind of answered for me, just thinking that wouldn't be my thing. And then they put me in the whatever middle computer class the first year, and I was bored. I was really bored, like cutting class board. And then I got caught and had to carry on like a 19-inch CRT monitor and just needed something else. So second year in high school, my sophomore year, they put me into A+ certification courses. And I passed through that course with flying colors and really loved it. And then the next year I was like, right, do I go into I think at the time it was MCSE for very early version of Microsoft Server. And I actually decided to do other things. The server networking thing kind of was like, yeah. So I started doing a lot of graphic design, some basic VB programming. And we had other courses in my school that we could really leverage, which was great. So I went to high school, and then for me in the US school system, computer science isn't what it is today for a lot of the grad students that I see. It was more of it was cool, but a lot of people I knew in tech weren't getting degrees in tech. They were getting degrees in English and, basket weaving or whatever. So I went to university thinking, right, I'm going to go be a doctor. This is going to be a great idea. I joined the military. I was in the US Marine Corps, trying to find my path for university. And I graduated university with my degree. I call it my degree in basket weaving because it's a phrase we use in the US. I don't do anything with my degree. Yeah. I have a degree in psychology, applied mathematics, and cellular molecular biology because I wanted to go be a doctor. Wow. So I was like, oh, this is a great idea. Yeah. I don't use it at all today. And I graduated school, and I was on my course to med school, and I ended up moving to Boston, Massachusetts, and got a job at Tufts University. And that was my first real job outside of university, because I had done tech jobs in uni, but I was like, this pays the bills. It's gets you your kind of pot noodle, your beans on toast kind of meal. And that was it. So I started working at Tufts. I paid off all my debt and I went, this is awesome. I'm in my early 20s. I paid off all my debt. I'm working on my master's degree, and I watched all these masters and grad students kind of miserable. I had a lot of friends in medical school, and I thought, I have the next 10 plus years of my life to look forward to, and it's going to be stuck in school. It's going to be stuck working long hours, and I'm going to incur a lot of debt. And I love medicine, but it was prohibitive. So I also felt really comfortable in my team. There was another female in my team. I always felt different. And my team just embraced me, and they were such cool people. And it was the first time as an adult in my 20s, adult in 20s kind of, seemed a little weird to me because I never felt like an adult, still don't. Yeah. And I just stuck with it. And I ran with it, and it just kept evolving, and I kept growing out of my roles. And I moved to the UK about just over 8 years ago now. I was working for a company in the US and got fed up with everything, just a lot of things. So I moved over to the UK and did it, made the move. And from there, I've worked for partners in the UK, so delivering solutions in data centers for different partners. And then that transformed into Azure. And I was like, ooh, this cloud thing. Because I kind of heard about a cloud thing when I was in the US. And a company I worked for in Boston just was like, oh, we're going to devise our own private cloud. And I'm like, this sounds stupid. Why would we do that? What customer wants a private cloud? And then it transformed into me using Office 365, which is now M365. And I loved it because I was managing an Exchange farm plus a SharePoint farm plus everything else. Yeah. And that was kind of like, oh, this cloud thing isn't too bad. Okay. And then Azure came about, and I had my first customer, kind of POC into Azure. And I was like, oh, this is fun. And then I really started embracing Azure. And then I was designing solutions for customers from the outside of their data center all the way into the application stack. And I really started getting more into the architecture design, but then into the development side. Yeah. Like, it's not just the infrastructure, like what's going on in the code. And I kind of just went down this like technology rabbit hole of like wanting to know more how applications worked and actually writing the code to do it. Because there's cool things you can do there, and it affected the infrastructure. And the infrastructure stuff is cool. But I needed a new challenge. And then,
absolutely. Yeah.
It's how many more storage configurations can you do, or networking configurations, or building servers. And then you start automating servers. And then when I kind of transformed into this whole like infrastructure as code mentality, I was like, ooh, infrastructure as code. Like, I've done stuff with PowerShell. Oh, but this is how I can really use PowerShell. Take it a step further, and we can deploy things in the cloud with ARM templates. And then I discovered Terraform. And it just evolved, and it was a snowball effect. And you take all these experience I had throughout the years and all these different roles I had, all these different companies, and you take all those pain points and you're like, there has to be a better way. And that's how I've kind of evolved into my role today. And now in the engineering side, we're getting customers that are blocked getting into Azure and paving that path. So whether it's, deploying stuff, helping them write code, and enabling them to do more. And that is what has really excited me. It's just evolved from fixing computers to building and designing big systems to implementing large systems to making them better and constantly involving that what is better, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, to be honest, April, that's probably the second time I've heard your journey. I know you elaborated on with Lisa Clark on her YouTube video quite a lot. So it is such a diverse way that you've managed to find yourself in the position that you're in at the moment. But it resonates so clearly with my own experiences and my own kind of pathway and journey through the IT industry. Just the fact that to always be inquisitive, always want to know, right, I'm not just going to settle for what I'm doing currently, but what does this mean? What does that mean? And delving into the technologies. And you've certainly touched on a few of the key areas that I'm hoping we can delve into a little bit more detail, just your experience and what it means to kind of traditional operations folk like myself. So obviously my own learning journey. I mean, touching on the kind of the learning journey that you've taken, clearly, you've had that diverse, range of jobs throughout your career so far. What does it mean for you today when somebody says, how do you keep up with the pace of change with cloud? What does your learning journey look like at the moment, April?
So I think people, everyone can look at what's out there today, whether you're looking at Twitter or tech articles or what's getting published, Microsoft Ignite just happened, big events, you can see all these new and cool things coming out. And it's always overwhelming for everyone. It always is. Working in the technology is always overwhelming as well. Sometimes you go, oh, there's a lot to learn here. And I think my journey happened, I call it death by fire, just diving headfirst into the deep end. So for me, being a consultant and an architect before, it was literally customer experience based off the project. I was learning on the fly. because I put myself into new situations, I was learning so much, and new customer projects presented new challenges, and those challenges helped me learn. And I use the word failure, but I wouldn't say I failed. I learned a lot. And, there's great motivational quotes about failure and learning, and not really failing. I don't know any of them offhand, but
No. I'm with you. Yeah.
I cried. There was anger, there was tears, there was sleepless nights. But I learned so much, and I learned from my colleagues. I learned from myself, and I grew as a human, and I grew in my journey. So a lot of it was the death by fire. And I think other things for me is I didn't get Twitter. I'll be honest. Like several years ago, probably 5-6 years ago, I was like, Twitter, no. And then I started understanding. I was traveling a lot into London to see customers, or around the UK. I was like, oh, I can just scroll through and find things I need, and I could read them on the train instead of like just always having a book with me, because I learned a lot by books in the old days, and experience too. But I think social media has been super helpful for that. I also find we have so many good resources that have evolved at Microsoft, which really help. But I think every customer project's been the thing, and then the inquisitive mind of like, you know what, I had this problem over here, and I'll literally open up a search engine and go, who else has had this problem? And I will look on GitHub. I'll search, something to death to find out what other people have had an issue with. Because if you've had the issue, someone else has. So I use a lot of that time to like build that, and sometimes just mindless searching, or social media feeds that really help me say, oh, this person's doing something really cool. Can I apply that to what I'm doing? But there's so much information out there, and I think if you realize you don't want to learn it all, learn what interests you, and keep learning. I think that's where I've tried to keep my focus is, I'm focusing on very specific things literally today that I'm working on coming out of a customer project. Like I have so many learnings that I want to expand on and get better for the next project. So I'm kind of DevOpsing myself, if you will.
And it's a really interesting way of putting it, because I'm sure again it kind of, that's very relatable in the sense that you kind of learn, people learn in different ways, I guess. Like you say, there's books, there's screens and computers and learn modules that you can work your way through. I mean, I'm a bit like you, April, in terms that, you kind of, when you get your hands dirty, you get into a customer project, you get something that you kind of have to do. If you don't, it's potentially, your paycheck or your reputation as a consultant or an architect. So you kind of focus on a particular issue. So, I mean, it's just, I think the key thing I wanted to bring out there is that, for people watching this video, that the learning journey continues. I'm probably fair to say, April. I mean, even when you get to the position that you're in now, where you're working with I'm assuming large Microsoft customers, working on onboarding those customers into the cloud and using DevOps and all those good things, there's always something to learn. I mean, I'm not wrong in saying that. Do you think, April?
Absolutely. And I think when we're delivering a customer project, we have issues as a team. So a lot of what we do as a team is unblocking the customer, helping them learn Azure and whatever other technologies we're working with. We teach them DevOps. We teach them new ways of working as well, because we're trying to, I guess, lead by example. But we're constantly learning. And in CSE, we have kind of a build, share, learn mentality. Those are our 3 pillars in the organization. So I've literally just built a customer project. We've delivered it. And we're in the sharing phase. But in that sharing phase, and even the build, we're learning. So going into the customer project, we do a bit of skill up. But we have a lot of lessons learned as a team that we document. We give feedback to the product groups about maybe that were pitfalls for us in the project. But, it's scary to think, well, we didn't do it right the first time, but did we get it right? Or, what is that? It isn't necessarily failure. We got the project over the line, but we learned a lot. And we learned a lot about ourselves. We learned a lot as a team. The customer learned a lot, and the project got delivered. So I think, we're there to do new things in the cloud. We're there to unblock customers. And when you're doing these new things, you're going to find things in your application stack that you didn't realize existed. You're going to find, ghosts in the machine, and that's okay. And it's picking them apart. So if you're really an inquisitive person, being able to say, you know what, I'm going to pick this system apart, find it. It's a great place to be.
And that's where the learnings come from. I think, like you say, it's just having that inquisitive mind is probably fair to say that's probably a key to a lot of the way that anybody does learn. The difference between, like you say, just to quote one of those quotes that I probably won't get right, but the difference to somebody that succeeds is that they just didn't give up. That it's not that they didn't hit those problems and just keep battling through. So I mean, it's really inspirational to hear that that's how you guys work within Microsoft as well. It's nothing new. It's not shameful to ever say that you don't know something. It's just about your aptitude and your ability to find out what that thing is that you don't know and find out so you do know for next time. So I mean, it's great to hear. April, I just wanted to keep with the theme, obviously, from a personal development perspective. I mean, this week we've had International Women's Day, I think a couple of days back. And I mean, I guess, hearing your story, I mean, as a dad of two young girls myself and working in, sort of the computer science with STEM, working in that industry, I mean, clearly we know for years that it's been massively a massively male dominated industry. I mean, what does International Women's Day and in particular women that work in technology, what does that mean to you, and kind of what insights can you give us on that side of things, April?
So I think it's an interesting one. I use the word privilege because I had two parents that raised me to be quite independent. And for anyone that knows me personally knows I'm very independent. Sometimes opinionated, hard-headed also follow that statement. But I'm fortunate that my parents raised me to be me. Like, it was never off bounds to try something. So my parents were like, right, you want to go play football? And I say football, American football. With the boys, go play. If I wanted to play proper football, i.e. soccer for my American friends, I played. And I played with the boys. I played ice hockey. I was never told that I couldn't do something. So I was massively fortunate by my parents in that respect. And I think when you're a child or you're really young, you don't always see it. As I got a little bit older, into my teenage years, I started experiencing it. And it came from people close to me, in my extended family, my step family. I had a new blended family, and as soon as I started to get a little bit older, went to a new school, I started to see the cultural differences. And in the US as well, I moved to a different state to go to university. I saw a massive cultural difference in how women were kind of, I don't want to say treated, but were expected to act potentially as well. Each state has its own culture in the US, each city even. So I think for me, it's been something that I didn't recognize as a younger human. As an older adult, I'm like, wow, I'm very appreciative of my parents, like without question. And for anyone as a parent, it's a tough challenge. I have a stepdaughter and I try to empower her as much as I can. I try to keep everything, I use the phrase gender neutral, but if she wants to go do something, I let her do it. If she was a boy, I'd let her do it. If Megan wants to paint her nails, if Megan were a boy, he could paint her nails. So I think it's really tough. She wants to go play sports. I always encourage it. And I never try to make it as gender. And she was told when she was younger, oh, you're just a little girl, you can't do X. And I've tried to eradicate that. And I think for me, because I had the environment I had growing up in, I've never thought of it as gender or whatever, but I'm super proud of the waves we've made as a culture in the world, whether it be the US side of it and the UK side, because I live, I'm in both cultures now. But I think there's so much more work to do, and it's really tough. But it starts with us, as we're more cognizant of these things. What can we do to help it? And there was a lot of appreciation in social media for International Women's Day, which I thought was fantastic, and a lot of encouragement. And I saw some great women from Microsoft and in the community present on Monday. And these are outstanding women. And, it's hard to, it's hard to really voice the emotional side of it. But I think it's so critical that, as adults, we encourage our next generation to be better than us. And while there are so many great positives, there are still a lot of negatives. So I think it's us to us as parents, us to us as mentors. And I try to mentor some women in tech as well. And when people reach out to me and ask to be mentored, if it's a female in tech, I'm absolutely there. Like, how can I help? My journey was very different, as we've kind of discussed. And I want to encourage everyone to take that leap into what they want to do. And, whether it be with my stepdaughter or someone I'm mentoring and barely knew. But I think, as us as adults, we've got to really help the next generation be better than us.
100% agree, April. I think, like I say, with my young daughters at the moment, exactly like you say, if they want to do something, go and do it. I mean, I guess that's what it's all about. And I guess it's trying to even the balance, for various reasons. I guess, sort of different genders don't find their way into different industries for whatever the reason. And if those reasons are things that we can help change, if they're barriers to entry for certain people, then why wouldn't we? So I mean, it's great to see. I mean, obviously watching Microsoft Ignite last week, some of the kind of the senior people within Microsoft now giving, sort of the talks that traditionally probably would have been male dominated. It's just great to see that inclusion, that diversity of women giving those tech talks. I think I saw, I forget who it was that posted it the other day, but really there's, quite a defamatory sort of Twitter feed going on about women in tech and things like that. And, it was just a brilliant comeback to say, well, yeah, I've just delivered a talk to thousands of people virtually for the biggest tech company in the world. So, it's just great to see, and I'll continue to support in any way that I can. It's just great to see the people like yourself, April. There are other community members that are prevalent that I follow on Twitter, and it's just great to see that the information that is out there and the support for these kind of causes is great. And yeah, absolutely. Let's just keep it all positive, I guess, and move forward, like you say. Let's make our kids better than we are, I guess. So yeah,
absolutely. And there's nothing wrong with a stay-at-home dad, by the way. There's nothing wrong with stay-at-home dad.
I guess that's just where our society needs to get to, I guess, at the moment. Not to get all philosophical on anybody on a tech cloud talk, but yeah, it's just that understanding, that acceptance, and that respect, I think, is all it boils down to. You get those things correct, and even if you just look at that word respectful, just be respectful of everybody's views and opinions, I think the world would be such a better place. And yeah, I can certainly see, yeah, there's lots of work to do, clearly, but I can certainly see that things are definitely going in the right direction on these fronts. And in terms with the things that we all learn about, the growth mindset, the inquisitive nature, always just go for things. It's that positive spin on things wherever possible, and not the negative spin. And I suppose that is right across the board with whatever the situation needs to be in. But yeah, absolutely. It's great to hear your thoughts on that and really where you sit with it, to be honest, April. So, yeah, I guess, should we move on to a bit of techie talk now, somewhat? So,
yeah. That was deep. That was deep.
It was. We went off onto some other level there for a minute, but
that was deep. That was deep.
And of course, being, just to add to that, being a male in the industry, to kind of, sometimes it's tricky to kind of show, not tricky to show support for these causes, but sometimes you as a male, you feel, look, I really get where this is going. I really get I say that. Again, trying not to be patronizing. It's really difficult, kind of delicate thing that I find as an individual. Where do you? Of course, I'm going to support anybody for a positive cause or positive thing, but sometimes you almost feel, right, do I go all in and show my support, or do you kind of sit back and let it take its course? But yeah,
I think if you sit on your heels, are you doing anything beneficial? So I would challenge everyone watching to look at either their local school. Volunteering some time. So I've offered volunteer time to my stepdaughter's school to do some coding with them, but there's some great girls who code organizations that you can go and volunteer your time for. So I would say to anyone who's technical, or even just has something they can give to the community, look in your community around you, look at some of the other organizations, because a lot of these organizations didn't exist when you and I were kids. And absolutely. I think being able to help young people grow, and little girls, boys, whatever, and even teenagers, whomever, I think is super important, because I think there's probably also males that feel a barrier to entry in tech. I think probably less so in the STEM regions, but yeah, go out and volunteer. Volunteer at your kids' schools, volunteers at the local community stuff. There's some great organizations that you can volunteer some time to and just help, and give them some of your resource. And I think if we sit back on our heels, nothing changes. But if we just give some time, give what we've learned to the community, and like you're doing with this podcast, it's fantastic, right? People are going to hear it. So.
No, absolutely. And I guess it kind of echoes people's thoughts and feelings that sometimes if you are, like me, I do admit that sometimes you see some posts go up and you think, I get it, I want to support that, but sometimes it's how do you support it without being, seen as patronizing. Like I say, I'm a middle-aged white guy in the UK, and I'm probably in one of the highest privilege brackets that you could probably get. So, like I say, that doesn't stop me from wanting to support these causes, in the little influence that I have. I absolutely will. But sometimes, I guess, for other people, it's, how do they get involved, what they do. So, like you say, going out to schools and dedicating some time, some voluntary time to kind of help kids, whether they're male or female, girls and boys, just get in there, do some bit to kind of help society, again, in a positive way, and in a respectful way. I guess for me, that's what it boils down to, it's just being completely respectful of every opinion and every view.
Absolutely.
and just look on the positive side. But yeah, we are getting deep. This is going to win some awards, I'm sure now.
I feel like I should have brought a beer to this conversation.
We should have had
I'm going to go get a pint. I'll be right back.
No, I mean, April. So I mean, let's if we can move on to kind of maybe a little bit of the technical aspect of your job, what you currently do, and where you've got to. So obviously, you mentioned a few kind of key, for me anyway, some key technologies that you work with on a day-to-day basis, and obviously you're a HashiCorp ambassador, so the likes of Terraform, infrastructure as code, DevOps, all of that great stuff. So, I mean, we did have a little chat before we started recording, but as a traditional operations guy, the background that I came from was very much IT operations, a very small smattering of programming. I know enough PowerShell to be dangerous. I came from that kind of background. Mm-hmm. Moving into these worlds now where, sort of Git repositories, repos, version control, code, infrastructure as code. These are all terminologies now that I would argue are probably mostly alien to somebody similar to myself with a similar background to myself. I know I'm speaking very generally. And personally, I see that rate of change now where operations folk kind of need to dip their toes in the water, if not fully embrace all of these kind of new terminal. I say new, I know they've been around for quite some time, but not in the operations world. Yeah, new to me and new to people of my background. What's your take on it, April? And kind of, have you got any kind of hints and tips or thoughts behind how somebody in that kind of position might want to start adopting some of these technologies?
So think of it as buying a used car, John, or a car, right? You go to the car dealership and you're like, yeah, I need these things, but I don't need all that. That's unnecessary. And, I don't need the heated seats. I definitely don't need the heated steering wheel. Don't need the remote start. And then they're like, well, we only offer it in this package. And you're like, yeah, okay, I'll splurge. They cut you a really good deal. And you get your new car with all these added features. And you go, why did I not have this before? Like, why did I not have the heated steering wheel? Because when it's 4 degrees and raining in the UK and I'm freezing cold, my heated steering wheel is my best friend. And I will never live without one ever again. Like, it's ridiculous, but you're like, why did I do it? And I think you kind of hit that same thing in the ops world. You're like, why do I need source control? Like, why do I need Git? What's the point of, but I can push all the buttons and do all the things I need. Why would I automate it? It takes so much time. Why? And I think that's where a lot of people start with. And there's a bit of a fear around, well, those are developers' tools as well. Like, I'm not a developer. I don't know code. That's scary. And that's where I see a lot of people start from. And I think, John, you mentioned you were kind of there yourself a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Not
too long ago,
space.
actually. Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
it's new.
It's yeah, and I guess obviously version control and those kind of we've had sort of Visual Studio and Foundation servers, and the whole kind of the team working, or Team Foundation server, I think it was called, wasn't it, with Visual Studio, where you could have that centralized repository of a team of developers working together. Clearly, from the development side, that is kind of technology and practice that have been around for a considerable amount of time now. I guess for me, moving into the cloud world from a traditional kind of an on-prem or privately hosted data center where you've got those applications and services running that you feed and water and maintain on a day-to-day business, you check your logs, all that great stuff. When we kind of shift into the cloud, clearly that the whole platform, and we mentioned it, so ARM, so that as your resource manager, that ARM sort of baseline, that anything that you can kind of put into Azure or any cloud platform can be configured in some form of code. So in the case of Azure, we've got these things called ARM templates. Now, how does that differ? And why should I worry about ARM templates, maybe as opposed to some of these other technologies I've heard, like Terraform? When would I use Terraform over ARM, or maybe even things like CloudFormation with if I'm working with AWS? Have you got a nice concise way that you might sum that up, April?
Yeah, so I think I'd back this up a little bit and talk about cattle versus pets, right? So why infrastructure as code? Then we can talk about the which one to choose. And
yeah, sure.
If I would challenge any operational person to say, I've never pushed a wrong button or entered the wrong IP address or did something that brought down an entire system. Like, if someone has never brought down a system, you're not doing it right. Because I think we've all got
those
systems.
war stories, haven't we, April? I think we've got a few of those.
So those are frustrating moments, and you're actually thinking, am I going to lose my job today? Either, brought down a customer's tier 1 application system, or your own system, whatever. And then, when we have these server farms, if you will, whether they're virtualized, physical, doesn't matter. We treat them as pets. Like we spend lots of time, talking about our naming convention. We feed and water them. And you mentioned it, feeding and watering. Like there's so much time and love that goes into our pets, i.e. our server farm. When we start looking at infrastructure as code, we have cattle. We are herding a big farm of stuff, of resources, infrastructure, to do what we need it to do. So it becomes irrelevant what the name of our pets are. They become cattle. So they're VM 001, 002, etc. And then you go, right, so how do I do that? So there's absolutely PowerShell. PowerShell is one way to do it. And if you're an ops person, you're probably like, oh, I love PowerShell, but how do I get that step further? When you start going to the cloud, you're going, the cloud is made to automate. The cloud is there to help you. So you can absolutely move a virtual machine and have your pets in Azure, but you're not really leveraging the cloud. So then it comes to, well, I want to do this automation thing. And when you go into Azure, you build a resource out in the portal, your point and click GUI, and you have everything where you want it. You can hit export template, and that template gives you that ARM template. And you go, great, now what do I do with this? You can change parameters in that ARM template and deploy 10, 100 of those servers, or whatever the resource is, a web app or a firewall, what have you. You could have 100 firewalls if you wanted them by the click of a template. So it's minimized the amount of work you need to do to get the end goal. But once you have that template, you have a known good working configuration. Now, ARM is great. It's Azure specific. So if you are an organization that has an on-premises environment, which, to be honest, almost every organization is hybrid now. Like they're not just in Azure or on-prem. You might have multiple data centers, multiple clouds, and you're consuming multiple services of SaaS providers, whether that be M365, Salesforce, what have you. Yeah. So you need to connect into these. You're not just on-premises feed and watering your farms on its own entity anymore. So Azure's great for Azure-specific stuff. The ARM templates are great for Azure specific, and it's its own language. It's in JSON format, so you have to learn how to write this. So there's a bit of a learning curve there, and then how to automate it, and you can go further with it, deploy it so it automatically deploys, and now there's less error to that. But it is Azure specific. So if you're then working that hybrid environment, you go, there's a thing called CloudFormation. CloudFormation's great, but only AWS. So you have two different cloud providers, AWS and Azure, with their own proprietary configuration language, if you will. So there's a learning curve to each, and we'll call it a barrier to entry. So you have to size an organization how you learn that. Maybe you have an AWS team, or maybe you have an Azure team, and you split the teams. But then you're really dividing the teams, and you're not really coming together and working together on the systems, especially if the systems need to interact. So then you enter in another third-party service like Terraform. Mm-hmm. So Terraform uses its own configuration language. It's based on Go. It uses a configuration language that is, in my opinion, pretty easy to learn. So that barrier to entry, you still have it, but it's less of this and more of a little hurdle versus a giant hurdle. So I have found a lot of ops people enjoy Terraform. Terraform can also be used alongside multiple clouds. So if you're deploying on premises, Azure, AWS, or GCP, you can use Terraform. Now, different scripts, but the language is the same. So if you're an ops person and going, I don't want to have to learn about this in AWS, I don't want to have to learn about this in Azure and on premises, I want to actually just do one language. Like if I have to learn, I want to learn one thing instead of like four. So that's the advantage of the Terraform side of it. So then we can then go from that pets to cattle, and then choose a way in which we do that. And if you like PowerShell, you still have opportunity to use PowerShell with Terraform and ARM when you're going into Azure. So there's lots of cool things you can do there as well. So that PowerShell knowledge won't go away.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's just great to know that you've got those different options. But I suppose to a lot of colleagues that I work with at the moment, some of this can be quite confusing. It's like how many options do we want? And I know we've also got Bicep that's just been released now, which in my sort of inexperienced way of looking at it is essentially it's a more highly abstracted language. Very similar to kind of the Terraform scripting, where it's human readable. There's not so many curly brackets and rafts of data and detail that you've got to put into, like you said, like a JSON file compared to a Terraform file or something like that. Have you had a chance to play around with Bicep yet, April, or what are your thoughts on it?
I have. I was actually involved in a lot of the product group feedback with Bicep. So Bicep got launched, or before it got launched officially, I should say. So version 0.3 just got released at Ignite. Mark Rasinovich and Alex Frankel gave a really good talk on it. And I did a fireside chat with some guys in the US about it as well. So I have used Bicep. What they wanted to do is make something more human readable. So it is ARM. So it has an ARM template underneath it, just in a different format on top of it. So it's more JavaScript focused. So again, a different language, but you don't need to know JavaScript as such. But if you know JavaScript, great. And if you ask why JavaScript was chosen, it's because it's the #1 used programming language across the world.
Sure.
So it appeals to, in theory, a large percentage of the population. It is a lot more readable than an ARM template. So they've also put a lot more features into it. So, when we talk about the differences of like ARM templates and Terraform and CloudFormation, I mean, there's things like being cloud agnostic, but there's also features built into Terraform that ARM templates don't inherently do. But Bicep's picked up a lot of that functionality into its new version as well. So there's some cool stuff you can do there. But what's interesting is when I was doing my fireside chat with Stephen Moralski and Jay Gordon and another gentleman whose name I can't remember off the top of my head, he's going to kill me if he ever sees this. But we had a whole conversation for like an hour and a half. And these languages, like no matter what you choose, they come back in full circle. Like you're still adding in loops and conditionals, and you still have the basic fundamental problems of learning a language and learning code and infrastructure as code. So I think you have to think of, as an organization, like what are you trying to achieve and what do you need? Because you have other tools out there that can do configuration and help manage. You can create run books and have everything going forward so that everything's managed down into the VM and a desired state, if you will. So I think you have to pick what are you trying to achieve? What do you want to, and what's the skill set of the team? And a lot of what my organization does, CSC, is we go to the customer and we use what is comfortable for them. So we may engage with the customer who's using something that is not Terraform, maybe not ARM, maybe it's Pulumi, maybe it's something else, Ansible. We go to the customer and we use what's comfortable for them in a lot of cases, because we're handing off the project to the customer. We're coding, building with them. We don't want to teach them something completely new. So I think every organization, every human has to go, right, what's my comfort level and what's my use case? But it's kind of that fundamental question you have to ask. There's never like one right answer on infrastructure as code. It's what suits you and what you're comfortable with. And there are tons of resources out there to learn, and it is hard to choose which one.
No, absolutely. And I think, part of, within my team where I work at the moment, part of that decision-making process was, for a number of months, a case of us going out and trying all of these things and getting some feedback from various people. Because obviously, my job, I work for a partner, so I've got many different customers, much like you're probably in that position, April. So when I go and speak with one customer, they may have different, operating policies, managed services that they use for themselves that may have certain skill sets, or, it could be, a hosted managed service. So the handoff into that kind of support function as well to continue that operations and that constant optimization phrase that we hear a lot of when we talk cloud is handled in the right way. So yeah, I mean, just making those choices is quite difficult, I guess. If you're in maybe a small to medium sized business, you're there as an operations guy looking at all of this, looking at social media, thinking, right, where do I start? I guess we've talked around a few ideas there. You're going to some great advice on how do we select a particular language for doing something like infrastructure as code. And I guess, I mean, just to kind of elaborate on that a little bit, April, in terms of, it's a great analogy there, pets versus cattle. That's a brilliant way of framing it. I do like that. I mean, in terms of, what does infrastructure as code bring to the everyday ops? I know we said, that removal of errors, as being one benefit to an operations person, where they're going to keep their job. They're not going to click a button and get themselves fired, like you've alluded to. That, I think I've had a few close shaves over the years. But what other benefits are there in terms of infrastructure as code? And, how can we kind of start to look to manage that kind of code?
So there's a lot of benefits. I think one thing is, when you talk about automation and think, why do we want to automate things? And a lot of people are like, well, I'm going to automate myself out of a job. And that's kind of a joke, but you shouldn't. So I think you think back to, like, again, the pets versus cattle analogy. When your pets got sick, you spent all your time. And a lot of times in a lot of organizations, you're being very reactive to situations and not proactive. So infrastructure as code, you change the mentality of going, reactive to proactive. And that's really important because you're thinking, right, this broke again. Oh, it breaks every time I run an update, or every time this happens, this breaks. There's something wrong. And you're like, well, I don't have time to fix it. So if we can look at, maybe not fixing what's there, but maybe looking at, when we look to re-architect a solution, maybe this is the time to look at, can we use infrastructure as code, and what benefit will that derive us? So that becomes the more proactive piece. And there's a lot of changes that have to happen when you start looking at infrastructure as code. And we say change and people go, oh, well, that's scary. Change is scary. That changes my job and adds more work. So there's an upfront human cost that, yes, we need to scale up, but it means we start doing things like source control, which become really important with infrastructure as code. And what does that mean? So source control is, I have a central repository where I'm putting my infrastructure as code and my team can contribute to it. So that means when I make a change, we can track it. Because what happens when you break that system that you push the wrong button on? Yeah, I didn't do it. And not that I've said that, but you have a bit of an outage, we'll call it, in your organization or with a customer. And there's sometimes a lot of finger pointing and blame game. And nobody wants to admit, yeah, I pulled the trigger and I broke the whole system. I mean, I have absolutely had to admit when I've broken something, especially when the customer was on the phone and I may have rebooted their entire cluster at the same time. Don't ask. It was a bad day.
That was just an example. Yeah, that didn't really happen, did it?
It didn't really happen. And the customer knows exactly who they are. And maybe I'll share this podcast with them. But I remember being on the call and my face just lost all color. And I heard a string of Bostonian flavored words come out of his mouth.
There's a certain feeling you get, isn't there? There is a certain feeling you get when you realize you've done something wrong and you've now got to try and fix it.
I'm going to cry now. I'm just going to sit in the corner, cry, come back into now. But yeah, I think you really have to change that mentality. There's a lot to learn. And the source control thing is important because you can track what changes you made. And it means other people can review your changes. So you get peer review. So also, let's say you've written a script. You love PowerShell. I've written this PowerShell script. I want my colleague over here to review it for me. How long does it take that colleague to review that? And how do they give the feedback? So things like source control, let you put comments in, highlight code snippets, make suggestions, and then you can approve it before releasing it. And you can even run testing on it. So maybe we run pester testing on our PowerShell code. Are we getting what's expected out of our code before we deploy it? And Terraform's really good with that. Terraform shows you what it's going to deploy before it actually deploys. And it also lets you create an audit trail, because a lot of times in an organization, we see a lot of organizations security and compliance requirements. This isn't secure enough, can't do this, it's not secure. By having that traceability within the organization with source control and with your tooling, that really helps. So it does change the tools you use. It changes how you work. And there is definitely that upfront learning cost, but the payoff is massive. So if I can build a server in Azure, pull up that template and go, right, we know this is our good working template, and this is what we use as our gold standard image. So anyone that's run a virtualized environment and has that gold image they deploy, it's hardened, it's ready to go. We just keep that image and we just go, and we can scale out to 100 servers. I've done demos with Terraform where I've done 50 servers and I've actually broken Azure because we might have had a data center capacity issue at the time, but I can easily scale to 25 servers on a whim, and it's there. And that's what my organization needs. And instead of having one server that having to go build 2 or build 4, I can get my team those servers. I can get them those resources. So there's so many benefits that go along with it. And there's a massive learning curve. And, it's always that argument, I don't have time to do this. I don't have time to learn this. I'm busy fighting fires all day. It's breaking that cycle. It's finding the thing that hurts most and starting there and saying, right, this is our biggest pain point in our organization. We're going to start here. We're going to fix it. And it's breaking it down. It's learning about it. Why does it break? How does it break? And making it better. And that will alleviate a massive burden off your shoulders with that upfront investment.
It's just such a great way of framing that, because, fighting fires just seems to be IT full stop, doesn't it? I
Stay in the life.
I don't think I've ever worked anywhere where, this whole reactive mentality hasn't been, king of the day sort of thing. This whole way of, okay, yeah, I haven't got time to look into all that new good stuff because I'm too busy putting that fire out over there, too busy fixing that server, whatever it may be. So I mean, in terms of where we're going with this whole infrastructure as code, clearly, we're kind of saying, look, these are good skills to kind of start looking into. Whatever your tool of choice or your preference that you want to use, yes, there's a little bit of learning that you may have to do to kind of work out what those differences are for yourself. Like you say, there's some great resources out in social media, on the internet. There's a ton of that information. But I mean, we've been fortunate, as you know, April, I'm one of the co-organisers of the Welsh Azure user group.
Mm-hmm.
You've been a great guest for us just before Christmas, where you came on and you did a fantastic demo of kind of that. I think it was the A/B testing of deploying an app through sort of DevOps and that whole technology stack of. I brought up the word DevOps. I think we were trying to do it without mentioning that word, weren't we? But, from my point of view, April, obviously DevOps as a concept and a mindset of this people process technology is completely different to Azure DevOps. So Azure DevOps
is a tool.
Yeah, is a tool set. So I guess it's probably fair to say Azure DevOps takes care of the technology part to a certain extent. But I mean, to kind of take that a stage further now, so when we're looking at infrastructure as code, we can do some great things. We can automate some fantastic, ways of working, like you say, for various different reasons to get various benefits out of it. Where does Azure DevOps fit into that stack, April, in terms of, because from my own sort of viewpoint, we've got, again, we look, there's a number of technologies in there. We've got things like boards, we've got repos have popped up again, and Git, and we've got sort of there's testing modules in there. There's a whole plethora of things that we can do with DevOps. But then I find, well, actually we can use third-party tools and we can kind of bolt things into it. I mean, how do you summarize kind of what Azure DevOps is to somebody like myself from an operations background?
So we use the term developer. So forgive me here, but it will come up as we talk about developer. And though we're operational folks, it's the phrase developer I think is kind of misplaced, but referenceable. With Azure DevOps, the tool, it has so many different facets built into it, and it hooks into so many different things. But it allows you to deploy any language into any platform, and that's simply it. Any language into any platform. And the reason why I fell in love with Azure DevOps, not because I work for Microsoft, like taking the Microsoft thing off the table, is because as an ops person, I want to automate things with PowerShell, or I want to do things to a virtual machine on premises or into Azure. I can do that with that same tool. I can have multiple pipelines and do that. If there's a third-party tool that my company is already using, I can hook that into Azure DevOps as well. Azure DevOps has so many facets, and it has everything from the boards you mentioned, which your technical project managers could use, or your PMs, or people could have insight into what you're delivering. And it helps you organize, with Kanban boards and your team, and lets you run your retrospectives and run a team calendar. Like, it has so many cool things built in to let you leverage these DevOps practices, if you will. And then it has things like your pipelines and your test plans, and it has a repository. So if your team's going, right, we could use GitHub, and GitHub has, great, it's used by, more developers than any other platform in the world. But maybe that scares the team, or maybe there's other things they need, because, GitHub doesn't have the boards feature of Azure DevOps. It hooks into so many different things though. So maybe Azure DevOps is a great place, but it literally allows for any language onto any platform. So we talk about hybrid again, GCP, AWS, Azure, on premises. It can do all of that without an issue. And it does things like test against Windows virtual machines, Linux virtual machines, and even Mac OS. So for every organization, if you're using something other than a Mac OS, a Linux, or Windows VM, you can write some custom runners and testers, but you can test against that and test your platform against that. So it's compatible, and it's highly compatible, which is great. So it's a really good leveraging tool to help an organization or a team achieve to do more.
Yeah, no, and I think some of the things like my own learnings working through kind of Azure DevOps and infrastructure as code and speaking to customers that I deal with is very much, to a lot of businesses, this is all new. Let's a lot of the businesses I deal with, they may not have their own internal dev teams. They may have a bunch of operations folk that are kind of just in that traditional sense. So, I see a lot of that coming over from the traditional way of working into this new cloud way of working. And again, we use the word new because it is new.
It's
to a lot
new
of
to
people.
you.
Yeah, exactly. Even though these technologies have been around, and yes, I guess there's that confusion again. You picked up on the word developer. I think it probably is the right word to use, if I'm being honest, because yes, we need to still operate IT systems, but you're kind of learning those new skills to actually become a developer of infrastructure, of like you say, whether you take that infrastructure as code and push it deep into the VM, or even platform as a service components. So all of a sudden now, our roles, is it fair to say, have become quite blurred? And
Absolutely, and it's that mentality. And I'm going to tell you a really good story. And God help me if my husband ever hears the story that I'm telling it to people in the real world. I was sitting in the car with my husband, and we were driving on a summer trip somewhere. I had joined Microsoft several months prior, and he was so proud. My husband absolutely supports what I do, and I think that's great. But he had a little meltdown in the car. This conversation may end my marriage, but that's okay. We're in the car, and he's an ops person. We both used to work in a very similar space. He runs a virtualized cloud platform for his company, and he is amazing at what he does. But he is an ops person, and he didn't quite get he is great at automation, but he hadn't flipped that switch in his head like you had at that point in time. And he panicked. He goes, "You're taking all the customers. Microsoft is taking all the customers." And he looked at me and said, "You're taking all the customers." I'm like, well, hold on. Microsoft has a cloud. We don't take all the customers. And I was like, look, customers are hybrid. They're taking, people are utilizing M365. Okay, so there's less of an exchange environment to manage, and maybe the Skype for Business thing and the whole SharePoint farms are out the window. Cool. Having managed them in the past, I don't mind not having had to manage those. But he really had an issue with that. And he goes, "I'm not going to have a job." He literally thought in the next year he'd be out of a job. Now, husband today is brilliant at automating stuff with PowerShell. He writes some fantastic PowerShell scripts. He works in VMware. He's fantastic with it. He automates stuff in Python. He's not a developer by trade, but he has turned into that. And if I call him a developer, he's like, "I'm not a developer." And he's, gets all like, whatever. But I think you're right. He is a developer of code, of infrastructure as code. And understanding to the wider people that, you have a role running an infrastructure, and, you point, click, even if you're managing storage or networking, like it's, the lines are blurred amongst our teams. We are writing code and to help teams more efficient, work more efficiently. And it's taking your technical knowledge of, whether you've been in the industry for 5 years or 20 years and moving it forward. Like, we need people to automate stuff. We need our networking teams to automate stuff. We need our storage people to automate stuff. And there's so much more that you can do than just plugging in stuff anymore and pointing, clicking. And that's what we want people to understand. And thankfully, my husband today has definitely moved into like super automation mode, and he's kicking butt at his job, and he's embraced it. He's not fully there. I'd love to get him into the whole, like, he kind of uses source control. I would love to get him like fully on board. But for every other ops person out there, like, you're not alone. It's so common to go, "I'm out of job." And that's what people fear. And still today, when I go into customers and they're like, "I'm out of job," they're talking about Azure, and we're all on premises, and I've been doing my job for 20, 25 years, and I'm comfortable. And it's like, no, we need you. We need your expertise of the system. We need the net knowledge you bring to the table and help us make this better. Like, we don't want to get rid of people. We want to make people better. And we being, Microsoft and all the other technology providers out there, we want to help make the technology better for all of us consuming it.
I think our conversation has probably come full circle, April, in terms of what you described for your own journey was that inquisitive mind, that want to know the next thing. And I've certainly found that having that mindset in my own personal journey has helped me not just to stay kind of stagnant in looking at the, I look after this bunch of VMs, I will feed them water, I will update, I will, install the next version of the application as and when it becomes available. To now, having that, right, okay, how can I do this better? How can, like you say, how can I automate my way out of my own job? And I think to touch on something you mentioned then, and an own little personal take on this, is that I was very heavily involved with Microsoft 365 for probably the last 12 or so years, I guess. I've been working with 365. I did all my certification. I was a messaging and comms guy. And I saw this shift, this big shift into 365. I thought, that migration is only going to last so long. Having that operations mindset to think my my key role here is to move a customer from using whatever their on-premises systems are at the moment into this thing that was called Office 365, or BPOS, I think it was when I first started looking at it. But then Office 365, I thought, in my own mind, ooh, hang on a second, I'm kind of like a traditional infrastructure guy at heart. So what's going to happen then when all these migrations dry up? I'm going to lose
my job, and everyone's going to be on M365, and I'm not going to have anything to do. Absolutely, I was there. I remember losing sleep over that. I absolutely remember losing sleep over that.
No, and that was one of the catalysts for my desire. I was always dabbling in infrastructure and Azure. I think key to it for me was having that inquisitive mind and kind of keeping your fingers in all the pies just to see what's happening across the kind of the broad landscape of things. And I think, just to kind of pick you up on, like you were saying there with own family members, kind of, you can live with somebody that's working in one way and another, and until you're right in what you say, until that kind of light bulb moment happens in your head, it's too easy to be there in the zone thinking, what am I going to do? How am I going to manage this? And I think if my own recommendations or my own advice is that it's not as scary as you might think it is, and once you dip your toe in the water, you start learning some of this, and I think you said it earlier, April, with Terraform, is that it becomes actually quite enjoyable. In maybe that's just a nerdy thing for us to say because we're techies, but I think for me it was really the possibilities and the things that you could now do kind of abstracted all of that noise of the confusion of which tool do I use, what do I use, when you realise that you can use whatever you want to use. What do you want to do?
What makes you happy? Yeah, what makes your life easier? And I want to take a step back and think back to when you were a kid. Think back when you were a younger version of John. Why did you get into tech? Like, what excited you?
That's a difficult memory. Hang on a second. That's a go.
But I mean, realistically, why did we get into it? Because it was fun, it was new, and it was changing. And I had a manager once tell me that code should be playful, and that's true. And if you go to work and it's tedious and it sucks, get a new job, right? Like, that's what I would kind of say when people ask me for career advice. I'm like, if you hate your job, get a new job. Like, work, you should enjoy what you do. And there are going to be tough days, like, don't get me wrong, but we got into this industry because it was fun and we could be playful. And when you're a child, kids learn by playing. Look at your daughters, like, they're exploring and they learn, and you see them like, Daddy, I found this cool thing. I don't know how your kids speak, but just pretend, right? Daddy, I found this really cool thing. And they're excited to tell you about it. And we have to kind of revert our heads out of like these cranky old adults and say, right, when I was a kid, I enjoyed learning and exploring, and I got into trouble as a child. Now as an adult, I get into trouble in a different way. I break something and not a customer production system anymore, usually, hopefully. But I'm trying to learn and be exploratory. Like, and code should be play, and learning should be play. And we learn a lot, most of us, by doing. So it's getting out there and getting a sandbox environment to play in, and having a go and just seeing what you can do in something. And you're right, it's something simple, like take a small bit of Terraform code and go, right, I've deployed a resource group. Okay, now I'm going to try a virtual machine. Wow, okay. Let's try 2 virtual machines. Oh, this was fun. And it was easy. And you go, that is so cool. So I think once you get those small wins, start small, it's that excitement of, look what I built. It's like building Lego, right? I mean, that's how I think of it. That's what I tell my parents I do. I tell them I build Lego because they have no idea what I do. But
absolutely. I mean, it's just great to hear, obviously, to those operations people out there, it is, the amount of experience that those people have built up over the years to kind of move into that kind of development style way of working, I think is probably fair to say. Things like VS Code, Git, repos, Git commit. What's a Git commit? Why have I got to put a message on? What's this issue thing? There's loads of terminologies that surround that I think, as soon as you just give it that little bit of time and attention and read and just understand what they're for, certainly for me, it was like, oh, right, okay, I get that. I understand why, that is a good thing. So, I mean, I guess it's to kind of, help those folk that still are in that mindset maybe, or trying to make the shift. Yes, there's lots of different areas in my experience, loads, and I'm far from stopped. The learners, I've got books behind me, I've got stuff on the desk. There's so much that you can get involved with. But to echo your point, April, I think it's got to be fun, and I'm certainly personally having a great deal of fun learning all these new technologies, and I take them to my customers. We have a bit of a joke about things, and these kind of conversations, I think, is where we're headed at the moment with all our customers. Is probably fair to say. I mean, on that note, April, I mean, what are the next big bets from your point of view at the moment? I mean, with Ignite that was launched last week, we saw the announcement of Mesh, which, I think I tweeted it. I watched the video and somebody shot it down in flames saying, this video is too over the top. This isn't actually what you get in Mesh. But I thought, no, you're missing the point here. Mesh, I did watch the video and I did have goosebumps. When I watched that, I thought, right, okay, we're here with the technology now that kind of enables that vision that I've probably got of the future, the whole Minority Report, the way of working with, data on bits of glass that you stick in, all of that kind of great stuff. I mean, what's it look like from your point of view, April? What are the next big things that are kind of keeping you excited in technology, and what areas are you, looking forward to getting involved with?
So I think I'm going to use this phrase developer velocity, again, the developer word that we use at Microsoft. We talk about developer velocity, like how do we enable you to do more? And that's a massive mission at Microsoft, right? So when you look at the mesh stuff, how do you bring people together? Because the reality is all of us have spent at least a year or more separate from humans. We've not had a lot of interaction and it's been really tough. So part of it is that. Part of it's also how do we enable our people to be more productive and not be stagnant, and we envelop our teams in trust. So you look at Mesh and go, oh, it's the next big thing. The tech is there. So if we can't travel right now, how do we interact with people? Or even if when we can open up to travel, how do we interact with people? Is there a better way to do it? And I've seen customers start embracing some of the HoloLens technology in what they're doing day to day, and they're trying to become more efficient. And I think we are trying to work smarter as a society. And I think things that help enable that is a lot of where we're going to go. And when I speak to people and our organization's so far behind because we're still doing this and we're still doing that. I think the reality is we hear all this big tech, but actually a lot of organizations aren't using it, but the ones that are doing a lot more with it. So I think it's about enablement of developers, running trust in organizations, and being able to leverage a lot of stuff that's out there to help us do more. Because I think the world's in a really unique place, and a lot of the organizations that have spawned out of COVID have been because they've been able to embrace a problem and find that solution, in a time when the world just kind of shut down, right? And no one knew what was happening. So going forward, I think those toolings to enable us as organizations are going to be massive. And I think Mesh is one of them. Even when we travel, we're going to be traveling so much less. I think the cost of it, people are looking ways to be more effective, do their job better, have better insights into things without always having to travel halfway around the globe or, for a 1 hour meeting. Like the days of flying 3 hours for a 1 hour meeting are over, thankfully. But it made people really to really recognize that. So, and everything we're doing in the cloud, we're doing on premises, we're generating so much data. And I like to talk to storage people about data. Like I'm not a data specialist at all, but a lot of people that delve into storage and understand storage resiliency and redundancy, we're now looking at the data that's in storage, not just storage, right? And how much we can store. Like I work with so many organizations, like, we got terabytes, petabytes of data. What do we do with it? So I think we can do all this cool stuff. We can enable it. It's then that data output. How do we model the data? What can we get out of our data? And we talk about it in DevOps and like the monitoring piece. And, we talk about the infrastructure side. What kind of data are we getting out of our infrastructure that we can monitor and make it better, right? The monitoring is the big stuff. We collate so much data. So I think the data side is massive. How do we model it? How we move forward with it? And there's a massive, every system we run has data. And I think data is a big field. And I'm not saying data is going to take over the world, but everything we do generates it. So whatever it is we're doing is generating some kind of output, any kind of feedback, any kind of data we can do more with. And I think that helps feed DevOps, feed our cycle of learning, feed our technology capability in organizations, is that data output. So I think data is going to be massive, and how we handle it, how we manage it, and what we do with it.
No, I couldn't agree more. And actually, I wrote a few little notes, before our talk saying, for me, the kind of things I'm seeing, absolutely data seems to be one of those areas at the moment that, if we can consolidate, we can govern, we can manage, and we know what our data is, first and foremost, that data is the kind of the lifeblood of any business, so what we do with that and how do you make, get insights out of it, use AI and machine learning to get those insights out of that data to make your business better and to make your business more profitable and work in better ways, and it just doesn't have to be about the commercial value. I guess it's down to the people that are working for your business as well, help empower those guys and to do more and to learn more. So I mean, I think it's probably fair to say it's definitely a really exciting time. Like you say, that the
It
whole
is.
COVID scenario at the moment has kind of thrown. Maybe at first, obviously the negativity that comes with COVID is terrible. Of course it is. But I think, when you try and take positives out of any bad situation, certainly for the tech industry, COVID has kind of unlocked a lot of innovation streams, I guess, and ways, these kind of roadblocks to businesses being, whether it's because of, sort of security concerns or whatever, all of a sudden it was like, we just need to get this working. We need to get our organization working. So it's, brilliant to see what can be done in such a short space of time. And I guess for me, that's what makes it such an exciting place to work and want to work, I guess. Is that how you see it at the moment, April?
Yeah, and it was very much a forced evolution. So you take the Microsoft event. So we talk about Ignite a little bit. So Ignite used to be in person, and then we do Ignite the tour. So we go around to different cities around the world, and that was awesome. I love that. You can't replace the human interaction, but how do you take a massive event, deliver it remotely online? So Microsoft Build was online last year. I mean, they had 3 months to prepare for the event. That was all supposed to be in person. When everything locked down here in the UK last year, I was actually flying out to the US to go on a 2-week skiing holiday, and then flying back here for 36 hours, then going to Mexico to deliver talks at Ignite. And I remember speaking to the team, and we're all just like, what do we do? Nobody really could grasp how big this thing was going to be, right? How big is COVID going to affect us? And Microsoft, high up in, way above my pay grade, said, right, we're going to take these things online and we're going to deliver it. And we've evolved it. And the great thing is people are consuming so much more material now. And it's out there. It was out there before, but now it's really out there. There's so many online user groups. So you could tune into a user group covering a topic you want to hear in the Netherlands or in Germany or in the US. And a lot of them are pre-recorded. There's so much on Twitch and YouTube now that because we can't go to in person, everyone is recording everything. Yeah. So there's a huge value to it, but it's been a terrible situation for so many, and it's been frustrating, but so much can come out of it. And even things like, as humans, how we work from home, right? And how you structure your day, how do you structure your learning time? Because before, if you were commuting to your office, you had a family, you had other responsibilities. I don't have time to learn about these things now. My commute is out this door and around the corner, literally 3 feet to the next room, and then I go to sleep. So how do you then translate that into, how do I use my time more effectively now? So there is more time at hand, or we spend more time with our families, whatever the outcome is, or we're spending more time on our health, walking and, trying to stay sane basically every day of COVID. But I think there's so much evolution that's come out of this from so many organizations. So it's been really difficult, but I think we're making a comeback. People are evolving. I think technology is evolving, and people are recognizing, especially for organizations that are concerned about security, nope, can't do this. And they always have reasons why they couldn't do it. Well, as soon as work from home was required, developers, operational teams had to work from home. They had to have a laptop. They had to have remote access. They had to have secure remote access. That accelerated those things. So even for many of you listening, you may not have had a work from home mentality in your organization. They're immediately, right, get home, here's your device. And they got secure access up and running. So those excuses turned into actions immediately when lockdown hit, because we didn't really have a choice, did we?
No, absolutely. And I think, you're right in saying that work from home, I think, for those of us that do work from home, so fortunate, unfortunate, whatever you want to frame it, I've been working from home for a good sort of 10 years now. And you do forget, I did used to have a job where I was in an office, and I would go to that office. That's where my computer, I had a desktop tower. I didn't have a laptop for that particular job. So, in order for me to do my job, I had to go into the office. And you do forget those kind of things. And I guess maybe that's why certain tech people and industry people have kind of flourished, I guess, is probably the best way to describe it, because I guess for a lot of people in our positions, we've been used to this way of working for a significant number of years now, and I guess helping other businesses move forward with that way of working now is it's great. I mean, clearly, the whole negativity of how that came about isn't great, but the way that I'm seeing it is that it's definitely advancing people's thoughts and things that they thought weren't possible now, so that they're being challenged, possible. I guess. They're being challenged for what they think they can or can't do. April,
Absolutely.
I mean, we to be honest with you, I could probably keep chatting chatting to you for another 2 or 3 hours at this rate, because I mean, this has been such a fantastic talk. I mean, is there anything else that you think we can cover off now before we close out this call?
There's tons of topics.
I know.
If you want to throw a random topic at me, we could see how that goes.
Oh, I tell you what, yeah, you joked with me on Twitter about this, right?
I did.
IoT. So I copied a wrong link into the Twitter earlier. It was IoT. I've been doing a little bit of swatting. I want to sit the AZ220, the IoT speciality exam. I've been doing a lot of fun things over the last sort of probably 6 months or so now with IoT. To the extent that, I'm like I described to you before this recording, was that, looking to kind of show a complete obtuse end-to-end scenario using as much of Azure as possible. I mean, what are your experiences with IoT at the moment, April, and what do you understand, and what does it mean to you? Just a complete random topic.
Yeah, so IoT is interesting because it comes in so many formats in the corporate environment, personal environment. So a lot of people have smartwatches. So I have my smartwatch, I ingest data, and again, we talk about data. This all goes back to data. IoT ingests data. We have home automation. So for me, professionally, we do see a lot of IoT from devices, without question, with customers, and we've developed a lot of technologies in Azure to implement that, and things like Azure Sphere and all sorts of cool stuff. But personally, I pull a lot of data from my watch, probably obscene amounts of data, and then what do I do with it? But for me, I've been automating things in my house, and that's been the coolest thing for me, because I'm sitting there, right. We're going to change some things in the house. So what can we do that's really cool? And I keep watching these Twitter feeds and Reddit feeds of people that have implemented IoT in their house, and it's just completely fallen apart, or someone's hacked it. And I'm just going, right, how do I do this right? And how do I not let it overconsume? Because IoT you could put in pretty much anywhere in a home, but you don't want to overdo it. So I haven't built an entirely smart home, but I have a fairly smart home. I want to be able to control things and know what's going on. So I'm getting a lot of data out of my IoT devices. I know when my washer and dryer finished, I get a notification on my phone. And if I want to turn on the notifications on my watch, I could go walk downstairs and turn off my dryer. There's some really cool stuff I can do with the smart home devices. So for me, that's been my big play. So it's been a bit more personal for me. We do see a lot of customers with it, but I think using things like code to do this in, it involves learning, Python, YAML, all these other scary things that operational people are ooh, but the output is really cool. I know when my dryer's done. I know when my refrigerator's been left open. I can change the temperature in 3 areas on the ground floor of my house. So if my husband's in one room and I'm in the kitchen, we can have completely different zones and control it and know what's going on. If I want to turn on the air conditioning, I can monitor the air conditioning in 3 different rooms. And yes, I put air conditioning into a British home. For those of you that are in the UK are why are you putting in air conditioning? I'm because it's been 30 degrees every summer. So I have automated a lot. So I have that feedback and that data in most rooms in my house, but I won't put in a device to listen in. So while I say IoT, I'm keeping it fairly limited for myself, but generating data so I can control the billing in my house and how much I'm spending.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's a great thing. And I think, to be honest, that seems to be a lot of the the stories with the as you were talking there, I was just cycling that coloured lamp on my bookshelf in colours, from my Stream Deck at the moment. But to a lot of people, these kind of things, I got to get back to a colour that's not so glaring. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I've got an Alexa, an Echo Show sat down by the side of me here, but I think what's done it for me is obviously the capabilities that we've got in Azure. So things like IoT Hub, IoT Central is really that grounding to kind of allow people that maybe aren't, deep down techie developers. Don't get me wrong, I think it's probably fair to say you probably will flourish a bit quicker if you've got a decent sort of developer or at least one programming language behind you that you can kind of know. But certainly, like you say, that streaming of metrics and data into Azure to then, go and do something. So it's like that, it's a giant if this then that, isn't it? By the time you factor in sort of, Azure functions, or maybe even you use some of the Power Suite to kind of automate and do some of those workflow based things.
And Power Apps are awesome. So if you don't know any code, and there are so many use cases online, and there's use cases within schools, they hook into so many of the Microsoft products. Power Apps are amazing. I have something automated on a Power App where if I add a task, a to-do list for myself, it goes into my calendar, I prioritize it, and I can schedule it in because my to-do list starts growing. And that's like a practical thing. I don't have to know code to invoke a Power App at all. And I think what's cool about a lot of the IoT stuff in Azure is it's a managed service. So you do get an SLA, you get a package around it, so you don't have to do everything, right? Because we abstract the infrastructure piece. You just manage that service, which is great, and your code, if you will. So yeah, things like Power Apps are amazing. And you have logic apps and functions, durable functions, and there's use cases for all of them. And people go, okay, which one do I use? Look at a Power App. Like, it hooks into so many things, and it is if this then that in Azure, basically.
Yeah.
And I can automate so many easy to-dos in my day that it helps me quite a bit. Power Apps are awesome, and they're pretty much no code. Or you can start doing more with Power Apps and low code them and ingest some data into it.
No, absolutely, and I was chuckling as you say that then, because for me, Power Apps was one of those areas that I've done a fair amount with over the years, and sort of dipped my toe in. Power BI is something I use quite regularly now for work and things like that, but it's just such a massive area again. It's an exciting area, but
it's a specialty.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and just to take that learning, obviously, I'm one of those people. I don't know about you, April, but when I want to learn something, I got to try and learn it all. It's like, hang on a second, there's just not enough hours in the day.
I got to pull myself out of the rabbit hole and go, hold on, what are we trying to achieve here? Right, focus. But same thing with any project in your work, at work or at home, even a DIY project. You go down this rabbit hole. Oh, I can do this, and this, and you're like, hold on. What are we trying to achieve? But I think Power Apps are awesome, and there's been I think a massive uptake of them because you don't need to be a developer, and we're seeing a lot of it with like schools as well. So when we talk about volunteering with your local school, I'm just going to give like a little feedback for everyone listening. Like, something easy is like, are they using the M365 suite? So Microsoft does offer it out to schools and whatnot, but can they automate things in the school to help the teachers, especially with schools that are remote learning? Or whatever the situation is right now. There's some cool things they can do with Power Apps that a teacher can enable and configure. And we have some cool case studies on it, but the reality is, like, can you help the local school do this? How does it help the kids? How does it help them learn? Because you may not know code, and going in to teach them code things or teaching whatever technology course they're doing, depending on their year or grade. I mean, there's cool things you can do with Power Apps to help the school, help the kids. And it's super easy for people to get started. And I think, as an ops person, if you're like, code scares me, cool, look at a Power App. Look at it. Yeah. It is effectively if this then that for Azure and all the Microsoft products. So cool.
And to be honest, April, it's just I think it's quite a great way to end the talk. To be honest, I think we've come full circle, talked through all that minefield of learnings, the tools and technologies that we can use to kind of deploy some of this stuff for ourselves. And yeah, a fitting ending, I think, to our conversation. Power Apps is amazing. So if you are scared of code, go and have a little look at that, because you'll get into it in no time, I'm sure. But honestly, April, I mean, this has been fantastic. Thanks so much for your time today. I've really enjoyed our chat. It's it's been insightful, and it's great to speak with you as always. It's you're one of the Microsoft rock stars, so it's it's a privilege to have you come and say hello to me on my little show on YouTube. So thanks so much for that, April.
Thank you, John, for having me. It's been awesome, and please feel free to anyone watching this to reach out to me on Twitter or LinkedIn. Always happy to take questions and help people get started.
No, absolutely. Thanks, April. And as always, to those watching, I'll put a link to obviously all April's Twitter and LinkedIn and things like that. As that's how we got in touch with each other, April, for the Azure Use Group. I think it was over LinkedIn originally. So I mean, it's great to have you on. Thank you so much for your time, April, and I will speak with you all soon.